Welcome to Passions Illustrated. Before starting the video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Zachary Montgomery's cell phone vibrated for the 100th time. That morning in Portland, Oregon, his fingers trembled as he typed yet another desperate message to Jennifer. "Please tell me where you are, it's been 3 days." He watched the screen until the send confirmation appeared, followed by the same deafening silence. As the last few days, with deep circles under his eyes and tousled brown hair, Zachary barely recognized himself in the reflection of the laptop screen where he worked as a software developer. The Riverside Technologies office, normally a haven of creativity and focus, had turned into a prison of anxiety and increasingly dark theories about Jennifer's whereabouts. "Zach, you need to call the police," said Marcus, his coworker, approaching with a cup of coffee. "3 days is too long." "I've already called," replied Zachary, running his hands over his tired face. "They said they need more time, that adults have the right to disappear." The last word came out as a pained whisper. The 2-year relationship with Jennifer Parker had been like a dream. She was an art teacher at Bridgeview Elementary School with a smile that lit up any room and a laugh that made your heart melt. They had planned a life together, talked about marriage, even started looking for bigger apartments in the charming Pearl District. After work, Zachary drove his Subaru through the wet streets of Portland, stopping at every place Jennifer frequented. The art gallery, where she exhibited her work, the cafe where they drank hot chocolate on Sunday afternoons, the park where they picnicked when the rare Oregon sun came out. That's when her cell phone rang, an unknown number. "Zach," the voice was familiar. "This is Regina from the Moonlight Bar." The Moonlight Bar was a local establishment a few blocks from their house, a place they frequented occasionally. "Jennifer's here." The world stopped for a moment. "What do you mean she's there?" "She's been coming every night since Monday. I thought you should know." Zachary's heart raced as he made an illegal turn towards the bar. The rain had picked up, turning the city lights into colored blurs across the windshield. His hands gripped the steering wheel so hard that his knuckles turned white. As he entered the Moonlight Bar, the familiar aroma of beer and old wood greeted him. But his eyes were only looking for one person, and there she was, sitting on a stool at the bar, laughing nonchalantly with a man Zachary had never seen before. "Jen." Her voice came out weaker than she had intended. Jennifer turned slowly, her smile disappearing at the sight of him. "Zach, 3 days," he said, his voice shaking. "3 days without answering my messages, my calls. I thought something terrible had happened to you." The man next to Jennifer stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "I think I'd better go." "No, stay," Zachary said with a calm he didn't feel. "I'm already on my way out." It was at that moment that Abigail Morrison, a regular at the bar who was watching the scene unfold, approached with her red hair and piercing green eyes. She had watched Jennifer frequent the bar over the last few days, flirting shamelessly with different men. "Zach," Jennifer began, but he was already on his way out the door. The rain was now coming down in full force, soaking his clothes. As he staggered to his car, his hands were shaking so badly that he could barely get the key into the ignition. The next day, sitting in his apartment with a half-empty bottle of whiskey, Zachary had an idea, a terrible idea, born of pain and alcohol. If Jennifer could disappear for 3 days, he could disappear forever. He began to plan his own funeral. The plan was simple and cruel: spread the news of his death, make Jennifer feel a fraction of the anguish he had felt. He started creating posts on social networks, sending emails to close friends about a terrible accident. What he didn't expect was for Abigail, the redhead from the bar, to discover his plan. She found him preparing the details on his laptop in the Moonlight Bar itself 2 days later. "This isn't going to make you feel any better," she said, taking a seat next to him uninvited. Zachary quickly closed his laptop. "I don't know what you're talking about. I saw your post, very dramatic for someone who was clearly alive," Abigail commented, ordering 2 coffees from the bartender. "There's a better way to deal with this." "How?" Zachary asked, his voice laced with bitterness. "How do you deal with someone pretending you don't exist for 3 days while you imagine all the worst possible scenarios?" Abigail pushed one of the coffee cups towards him. "Starting with not becoming the person you despise." Her green eyes stared at him with a mixture of compassion and determination. "I have a better idea." And so, sitting in that bar where his heart had been broken, Zachary began to hear a different proposal, one that didn't involve revenge or lies, but something much more powerful: real healing. "First, you need to stop drinking that cheap whiskey," Abigail said, pushing Zachary's glass away firmly. Revenge and alcohol were never a good combination. The Moonlight Bar was emptier that Wednesday night, with only a few regulars scattered around the dark corners. The soft jazz music playing in the background created an almost ironic atmosphere for the serious conversation taking place at the bar. "What do you suggest then?" Zachary asked, still reluctant to abandon his original plan. His red eyes and unshaven beard were silent witnesses to the last few turbulent days. Abigail settled down on the stool, her red hair reflecting the soft light to the bar. "Have you ever heard of living well is the best revenge? It's a cliché, I know, but it works, and I have to say, faking your own death is a bit too melodramatic," says the person who hasn't spent 3 days imagining his girlfriend dead in some ditch. Zachary retorted, but there was less bitterness in his voice. "Actually," Abigail began, her green eyes fixed on a distant point, "I went through something similar. My ex-husband disappeared for a whole week. When he came back, he had a different ring on his finger." The revelation took Zachary by surprise. He took a closer look at Abigail, noticing for the first time the small wrinkles around her eyes, which seemed to tell stories of pain overcome. "How did you deal with it?" "At first I wanted to set fire to his car," she laughed softly, "but then I realized that the best way to get over someone is to become a better version of yourself. And that's exactly what we're going to do with you." Over the next few days, Abigail implemented what she called the Phoenix Project. The first phase consisted of a complete makeover. She dragged Zachary to Sterling Salon, where a stylist transformed his disheveled hair into a sleek modern cut. "I can't spend the kind of money on it," Zachary protested when Abigail insisted on taking him shopping for new clothes at the Pioneer Place Mall. "Consider it an investment in your self-respect," she replied, selecting a navy blue shirt that brought out his eyes. "Besides, you're a software developer in Portland. I'm sure you can afford a few decent shirts." The second phase of the plan involved activities that Zachary had never considered before. Abigail signed him up for cooking classes at the Portland Culinary Workshop, arguing that learning new skills was the best way to occupy his mind. "You're turning me into a project," he commented one evening as they tried to make risotto in her apartment. "No," Abigail corrected, adding wine to the rice. "I'm helping you rediscover yourself. There's a difference." The weeks passed, and little by little Zachary began to feel lighter. Jennifer's messages, which used to devastate him, now caused him only mild discomfort. He deleted them without reading them. On a particularly busy Saturday, at the Moonlight Bar, Jennifer showed up again. Zachary was sitting with Abigail and some friends he had made in cooking class, laughing at a story about a disastrous souffle. "Zach," Jennifer's voice sounded hesitant behind him. He turned around, and for the first time since the incident, he didn't feel his heart squeeze. Jennifer seemed smaller, somehow less bright than in his memories. "Hi, Jennifer," he replied with a calmness that surprised them both. "You look different," she commented, her eyes roaming over his new look. "People change," he replied, simply turning to his friends later as the bar began to empty. Abigail smiled at him. "Did you see, it didn't even take a fake funeral to make her realize what she'd lost?" Zachary nodded, realizing that his grief had turned into something different, something closer to gratitude. "Thank you, Abigail, for everything." "We're not done yet," she replied, her green eyes shining with a mixture of amusement and something else Zachary couldn't identify. "Phase 3 of the Phoenix Project is just beginning." "And what would Phase 3 be?" she said, leaning in to kiss him softly. When their lips parted, Zachary realized that Abigail's plan had worked better than any revenge could. He hadn't just gotten over Jennifer, he'd found someone who helped him become a better version of himself. The bar was almost empty now, the jazz music still playing softly, and for the first time in weeks Zachary felt truly at peace. The pain of betrayal was still there, but now it was just a scar that reminded him of how much he had grown. So Abigail smiled, entwining her fingers in his. "Do you still want to spread the news about your funeral?" "No," he laughed, squeezing her hand. "I think I'd rather spread news about new beginnings." The smooth sound of jazz at the Moonlight Bar had become a comforting constant in Zachary's new routine. 3 weeks had passed since the unexpected kiss with Abigail, and each day seemed to bring a new discovery about himself and the redhead who had transformed his life in unimaginable ways. "You still haven't deleted all the photos of her from your phone?" Abigail commented during dinner at Le Pigeon, an intimate restaurant on East Burnside Street. Her green eyes studied Zachary with that unique blend of understanding and defiance that had become her trademark. Zachary paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. "How do you know?" "Because you still look at him with that guilty expression sometimes," she replied, taking a sip of red wine. "It's as if you're still holding on to a piece of the past, even if unconsciously." He knew she was right. Although the Phoenix Project was progressing with his new closet modern haircut and renewed confidence, some emotional anchors still tied him to the past. "Phase 3 isn't just about the two of us," Abigail continued, her voice soft but determined. It's about you letting go completely. We can't build something new on old foundations. That evening, after dropping Abigail off at her apartment in Nob Hill, Zachary drove to Forest Park, sitting in his Subaru with the city of Portland shimmering below. He finally opened the folder of photos on his cell phone. Each image with Jennifer seemed to belong to a different life, like watching a movie starring someone else. One by one, he began to delete the photos: the first meeting at Powell's Books, the bike rides along the waterfront, the lazy afternoons in the Japanese garden. With each deletion, he felt an invisible weight leaving his shoulders. The next morning, Zachary woke up to a message from Abigail: breakfast at Mother's Bistro. I have a surprise for you. The restaurant, located in the heart of downtown Portland, was as busy as ever. Abigail was already waiting for him at a table by the window, her red hair shining in the natural light coming through the large panes. "So what's the surprise?" Zachary asked. After placing his order, Abigail smiled, that smile that made his eyes sparkle in a special way. "Remember when you mentioned that you always wanted to learn to dance?" Vaguely, he replied, trying to recall a wine-fueled conversation from weeks ago. "Well, I managed to get us enrolled in ballroom dancing classes at Rose City Dance Studio. We start tonight." The panicked look on Zachary's face made her laugh. "Don't worry, everyone starts from scratch. Besides," she leaned over the table, lowering her voice, "I've seen you dancing alone in your apartment when you're cooking." "Are you spying on me?" he asked, feigning indignation. "Your kitchen window faces my living room." Genius, she winked. The dance classes turned out to be a life-changing experience. With each session, Zachary felt his coordination improving, but more than that, he realized how dance served as a metaphor for his relationship with Abigail. It required trust, communication, and above all, being present in the moment. One evening, after a particularly intense waltz lesson, they were walking hand in hand through the Pearl District when Jennifer came around a corner. She was accompanied by the same man from the bar, and for a moment the four of them stood in an uncomfortable silence. "Hi, Zach," Jennifer said, her voice carrying a note of regret. "You're different." "I'm better," he replied, simply squeezing Abigail's hand lightly. As they continued on their way, Zachary realized that the encounter hadn't provoked any of the old emotions. There was no anger, hurt, or desire for revenge. There was only the calm certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "You know what's funny?" he commented when they arrived at Abigail's apartment. "That ridiculous fake funeral plan seems to have happened in another life." "In a way it did," Abigail replied, preparing 2 cups of chamomile tea. "The Zachary who wanted revenge is dead, and that's a good thing." Sitting on the comfortable sofa in her apartment with the night view of Portland serving as a backdrop, they began planning a trip to the Oregon coast. It was the first time Zachary had allowed himself to make plans for the future since the incident with Jennifer. "You saved my life, you know that," he said softly, watching Abigail blow on her hot tea. "No," she corrected, her eyes meeting his. "I just showed you that you were strong enough to save yourself. The real transformation came from you." That evening, as he drove home in the typical Portland drizzle, Zachary reflected on how his life had changed over the last few weeks. The broken man planning a fake funeral had given way to someone stronger, more complete, and at the center of this metamorphosis was Abigail, not as a savior, but as a partner who helped him rediscover his own light. The rain drummed against the windows of Abigail's apartment as she and Zachary organized old photographs spread out on the coffee table. It was an exercise she had suggested, sharing stories from the past to build confidence in the present. "This was taken on my wedding day," Abigail said, holding up a faded photograph. Her white dress contrasted with a strained smile she now recognized as a foreshadowing of what was to come. "I had just turned 23. Zachary studied the picture carefully, noticing how time had softened Abigail's features, replacing the naivety of the photo with a serene wisdom. "What was he like, your ex-husband?" "Nathan was charismatic," she replied, her fingers tracing the edge of the photograph. "The kind of person who could convince anyone of anything, including me, that his absences were always for noble reasons." The apartment on Nob Hill, with its panoramic view of Portland, seemed to create an intimate bubble. Around them, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the room, mingling with the smell of old books that Abigail collected. "You never told me the details," Zachary said softly. "About that week when he disappeared." Abigail settled down on the sofa, pulling her legs close to her body. "It was March. It was raining like today. Nathan said he was going to Seattle on business. On the 3rd day of no news, I started calling hospitals. On the 5th day, I found out that his credit card was being used in Las Vegas." Zachary felt his throat tighten. The story had painful echoes of his own experience with Jennifer, but there was something deeper, darker in Abigail's tone. When he came back, she continued, he had a different ring on his finger and lipstick marks on his shirt. He said he married his executive assistant, that I should understand that sometimes love happens like that. How did you get over it? The hardest way possible. Abigail smiled sadly. First I isolated myself, then I tried to lose myself in superficial relationships. It wasn't until I started going to the Moonlight Bar that I found a group of friends who helped me rebuild my life. The revelation made Zachary look at her with new eyes. The Moonlight Bar wasn't just a place of work for Abigail, it was a symbol of her own renewal. That's why you were there that night, he realized when I saw you walk into the bar, I recognized that look. She nodded. The same one I had years ago, and when I heard about your fake funeral plan, I realized that you were on the same self-destructive path that I had initially chosen. The rain began to subside, leaving only a whisper against the windows. Zachary moved closer to Abigail, taking her hand. Why did you decide to help me? Because someone needed to show me that there is life after betrayal, she replied, her green eyes meeting his. And maybe in the process, I also needed to prove it to myself. The silence that followed was filled with the weight of unspoken confessions and mutual understanding. Zachary realized that his relationship with Abigail went beyond physical attraction or gratitude. It was built on shared scars and the determination to turn pain into strength. You know what's funny, he said, picking up another photograph from the table. When I met Jennifer, I thought I'd found my happy ending. Now I realized that it was just the beginning of a journey that would lead me to you. Abigail smiled, but there was a shadow of concern in her eyes. Zach, I need to tell you something. Jennifer came to see me at the bar yesterday. Zachary's heart skipped a beat. What? She said she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Abigail continued, her voice firm. That she realized how much you've changed and that she wants a second chance. The silence that followed seemed deafening. Zachary let out the breath he hadn't even realized he was holding. How do you feel about that? Abigail asked, her voice betraying a vulnerability she rarely showed honestly. Zachary stood up, walking over to the window. The city sparkled under the night sky, lights reflecting in the puddles left by the rain. I feel gratitude for her betraying me. He turned to Abigail. Because if it hadn't been for that, I would never have discovered what it's like to truly connect with someone. I would never have met you. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Abigail stood up, joining him at the window. Are you sure Jennifer was your dream? It was an illusion, Zachary interrupted her gently. You're real with all your scars, stories, and strength, and that's exactly what I want. At that moment, while the city of Portland served as a silent witness, they kissed. It wasn't a kiss born of momentary passion, but of the deep understanding of two people who had been through similar storms and chosen to emerge stronger together. The old photographs remained scattered on the table, silent witnesses to past stories that had shaped who they were now. But for the first time, both Zachary and Abigail weren't looking back. They were fully present in the moment, building something new on the foundations of their shared experiences. The fall sun was bathing the streets of Portland when Zachary received an unexpected message from Marcus, his colleague at Riverside Technologies. Jen's here in the office. She wants to talk to you. Sitting at his workstation, Zachary felt a mixture of emotions that he couldn't fully identify. It was no longer the sharp pain that had consumed him weeks ago, but something closer to unease. You don't have to talk to her, Marcus whispered, approaching his desk. I can tell you're in an important meeting. Zachary looked out of the 20th floor window, observing the movement of the city below. His dance lessons with Abigail had taught him more than just steps. They had shown him that facing uncomfortable situations with grace was a valuable skill. No, it's fine, he replied, getting up. I'll talk to her. Jennifer was in the smaller meeting room, her fingers drumming nervously on the glass table. When Zachary entered, she seemed momentarily surprised by his transformation, the well-cut suit, the confident posture, the serene gaze. Hi, Zach, she began, her voice shaky. You look great, thanks, he replied, keeping a professional distance. What can I do for you? Jennifer took a deep breath. I broke up with Derek, she said, referring to the man from the bar. It was a terrible mistake. All these months I couldn't stop thinking about you, about us. Zachary watched as the words that would once have broken his heart now just echoed hollowly. Jennifer, why are you really here? Because I love you, she replied, tears forming in her eyes. Because seeing you with that redhead at the bar, so different, so happy, made me realize what I'd thrown away. A heavy silence filled the room. Outside, the noise of the city continued its incessant rhythm, oblivious to the drama unfolding on the 20th floor. You know what's Ironic, Zachary finally spoke, his voice calm. 2 months ago, I would have given anything to hear those words, but now he paused, thinking of Abigail, their nights of dancing, their deep conversations about scars and new beginnings. Now I realize that sometimes you have to lose something to find something better. Is it because of her, the redhead at the bar? It's because of me, he corrected. Abigail helped me find myself, but it was my decision to change, just as it was your decision to disappear. For 3 days, Jennifer wiped away her tears. I was confused, scared of commitment. Derek seemed like an easy escape, and now he no longer seems as attractive as the idea of returning to something safe and familiar, Zachary added, surprising himself with his own clarity of thought. Just then his cell phone vibrated with a message from Abigail. Dance class canceled today. How about a surprise dinner? I have something special planned. An involuntary smile appeared on his lips, which did not go unnoticed by Jennifer. You really love her, don't you? She asked, her voice laden with resignation. Yes, Zachary replied, realizing the truth of that statement the moment the words left his lips. And more importantly, I've learned to love myself too. When Jennifer left the office, Zachary felt as if one last chapter of his old life had finally been closed. He called Abigail immediately. Hey, he said when she picked up, can I tell you something interesting at dinner? Sure, she replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. But first, I need you to come to the Moonlight Bar at 7. I have a surprise. The rest of the day at work passed like a blur. At 7 o'clock sharp, Zachary entered the bar, surprised to find it completely transformed. Soft lights hung from the ceiling, creating an intimate atmosphere, and in the center of the space, normally occupied by tables, there was a small dance floor. Abigail was at the piano, a detail he didn't know about her, softly playing La Vie en Rose. Her green eyes shone with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. I didn't know you played, he said, moving closer. There are a lot of things you don't know about me yet. She smiled, continuing the tune. Just as there were a lot of things I didn't know about myself until I met you. The bar was empty except for them, and when Abigail finished the song, she stood up, finding Zachary in the middle of the makeshift dance floor. Jennifer came looking for me today, he said softly, pulling Abigail into a slow dance. I know, she replied. Marcus called me. Aren't you worried? Abigail leaned her head on his shoulder as they danced. No, because I trust you, and more importantly, I trust what we've built together. Zachary held her tighter, marveling at how their bodies fit together perfectly, as if they had been made for each other. Do you know what I told her? That sometimes you have to lose something to find something better. And what exactly did you find? Abigail asked, raising her face to look him in the eyes. Someone who taught me that true love isn't about pretending to be perfect, he replied, but about accepting our imperfections and growing together through them. The music had stopped, but they continued dancing to the sound of their own synchronized heartbeats, while Portland continued its eternal dance outside the windows of the Moonlight Bar. The Moonlight Bar had become more than just an establishment for Zachary and Abigail. It was the stage where their love story had begun and continued to develop. On that particular evening, as they shared a glass of red wine, Abigail seemed distant, her gaze lost in the city lights that shone through the foggy windows. There's something I need to tell you, she finally said, her fingers playing nervously with the stem of the glass. I've been offered a job in Seattle. Zachary's heart skipped a beat. Seattle wasn't that far from Portland, but the thought of Abigail moving made his stomach turn. When the position starts in a month, she replied, finally meeting his eyes. It's an incredible opportunity to manage a chain of craft bars. Will you take it? The question came out more vulnerable than he had intended. Abigail sighed, placing her glass on the counter. It's complicated. I've spent years building my life here in Portland, especially after Nathan. This bar friends you. His voice faltered on the last word. Zachary realized he was holding his breath. The last few weeks with Abigail had been transformative. She had helped him to overcome not only Jennifer's betrayal, but also to rediscover who he really was. Come with me, Abigail said, suddenly standing up. I want to show you something. They left the bar and walked a few blocks until they reached a small park. The Portland night air was surprisingly clear, with stars visible among the scattered clouds. This is where I came when I found out about Nathan, Abigail revealed, taking a seat on a bench. I spent hours looking at these same trees, trying to understand where I'd gone wrong, why it wasn't enough. Zachary sat down next to her, taking her hand. You never told me that part of the story, because it took me a long time to realize that it had nothing to do with me, she continued, just as what Jennifer did had nothing to do with you. Sometimes people just aren't ready for true love. A couple walked past them, laughing at some private joke, their footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalk. Zachary thought about how his life had changed since that fateful night when he planned his own fake funeral. Do you know what else I learned in this park? Abigail asked, a small smile forming on her lips. that sometimes we need to lose everything to find our true path. Seattle could be my next chapter, but I don't want to write it alone. Zachary felt his heart racing. What are you saying? I'm saying that I love you, she replied, her voice firm despite the vulnerability in her eyes. And that for the first time since Nathan, I'm ready to risk everything for someone, but I need to know if you're ready too. The silence that followed was filled with the soft sound of the wind in the trees and the distant rumble of traffic. Zachary thought about his job at Riverside Technologies, his life in Portland, everything he knew and considered safe. I can work remotely, he finally said. The company has an office in Seattle. I can ask for a transfer, but Abigail, he turned to face her fully. I'm not considering it just because you're going. I'm considering it because for the first time in my life I've met someone who makes me want to be brave. The tears shining in Abigail's eyes reflected the city lights. Are you sure it's a big decision? Remember when you found me planning the ridiculous funeral? Zachary laughed softly. You could have judged me, you could have ignored me, but instead you saw past my pain and showed me a better way. How can I not fall in love with someone like that? Abigail smiled through her tears. So let's do it. Start a new chapter together in Seattle. Yes, he replied, leaning in to kiss her, but on one condition. What? That you promise to keep teaching me to dance. I can't waste all those lessons. They laughed together, the sound of their happiness echoing through the empty park. Suddenly Abigail stood up, holding out her hand to Zachary. Speaking of dancing, she took her cell phone out of her pocket, putting on some soft music. May I have this dance, Mr. Montgomery? Right there under the Portland stars they danced. It wasn't a perfect waltz. Their steps were sometimes off-key, but there was a sincerity in their movements that no formal lesson could teach. Did you know that it was in this park that I decided to help you that night? Abigail confessed as they twirled slowly. You reminded me so much of myself, wanting revenge, wanted to make someone else feel the same pain. But you deserved more than that. You deserved a chance to turn that pain into something beautiful. And you, Zachary asked softly, what did you deserve? A second chance at love, she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. And I'm grateful every day that I found that in you. The music on his cell phone ended, but they continued dancing to the sound of their own heartbeats. Two souls that had found healing in each other. Seattle was no longer just a new city on the horizon. It was the next chapter in a story that had started with pain, but was turning into something extraordinarily beautiful. The Riverside Technologies office was quieter than usual that morning when Zachary entered for his last week of work in Portland. His request for a transfer to Seattle had been approved with surprising ease, perhaps because he was one of the company's most talented developers. So it's true, Marcus said, approaching his desk with 2 cups of coffee. You really are leaving? Zachary smiled, accepting the coffee. It's not exactly goodbye. Seattle is only 3 hours away. 3 hours and a lifetime away, Marcus replied, taking a seat on the edge of the table. I never thought I'd see you drop everything for love, especially after what happened with Jennifer. The mention of his ex-girlfriend's name no longer caused that familiar twinge of pain. Instead, Zachary felt a strange gratitude. If Jennifer hadn't disappeared during those 3 fateful days, he would never have met Abigail, never have discovered his own strength. Sometimes you have to lose your way to find the right direction, Zachary replied, remembering Abigail's words that night in the park. The week passed in a whirlwind of goodbyes and preparation. Zachary's apartment, once a haven of solitude, was now full of boxes and carefully selected memories. Abigail helped him sort through them, turning the tedious task into moments of discovery and laughter. Look what I found, she said, holding up a yellowed envelope. Inside was the original draft of the fake funeral plan Zachary had written that desperate night at the Moonlight Bar. I can't believe I kept this. He laughed, taking to paper. The words, written in shaky, tear-stained handwriting, seemed to have been written by someone else. We should frame it, Abigail suggested, her green eyes sparkling with amusement, as a reminder of how sometimes the worst moments can lead us to the best places. The night before the move, the group of friends organized the surprise party at the Moonlight Bar. The place was decorated with makeshift banners, and even Regina, the bartender who had called Zachary that fateful night about Jennifer, seemed thrilled. You've transformed this place, Regina commented, pouring special drinks she had created for the occasion. Of all the love stories I've seen born here, yours is my favorite. In the middle of the party, Jennifer appeared unexpectedly. For a moment, the music seemed to subside, and all eyes turned towards the door, but Zachary, with his arm around Abigail's waist, felt only peace. I came to wish you luck, Jennifer said, approaching the couple. Her eyes were different, softer, as if she too had found some kind of peace. Seattle is an incredible city. You're going to be very happy there. Thank you, Jen, Zachary replied sincerely. I hope you Find your happiness too. When Jennifer left, Abigail squeezed her hand. Are you all right? Better than fine, he smiled, pulling her onto the makeshift dance floor. I'm exactly where I should be. Soft jazz music filled the room as they danced, their movements now perfectly synchronized. After months of practice, the friends around them watched with knowing smiles, silent witnesses to a transformation that went far beyond dancing. Do you know what I love most about you? Abigail murmured against his neck. How you turned your pain into something beautiful, how you chose to grow instead of becoming bitter. I learned from the best, he replied, turning her gently. You showed me that sometimes we need to lose everything to find who we really are. The next morning, as they loaded the last boxes onto the moving truck, Portland presented them with a rare sunny morning. The city seemed to be saying goodbye in its own way, with golden rays reflecting off the windows of the buildings in an exceptionally blue sky. Ready? Zachary asked, closing the truck door. Abigail glanced at the moonlight bar one last time, its familiar windows gleaming in the morning sun. You know what's funny? When Nathan left me, I thought I'd never be able to trust anyone again. Now I'm leaving everything to start a new life with you. And that scares you? No, she smiled, entwining her fingers in his. For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of the future. They drove out of Portland with the rising sun at their backs, the moving truck following close behind the road to Seattle unfolded in front of them like an invitation to a new adventure. Hey, Abigail said softly, pulling something out of her bag. It was a small music box. I bought this yesterday for our new apartment. When she opened it, the soft notes of La Vie en Rose filled the car. Zachary smiled, remembering the first time he saw her playing that song on the piano in the bar. So that we never forget where our story began, she explained, and where it continues, he added, taking her free hand. The city of Portland grew smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror, but the memories they had built there, the nights of dancing, the deep conversations, the tears, and the laughter traveled with them, weaving the first threads of their new chapter together. Because sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another, much more beautiful one. And as Seattle loomed on the horizon, Zachary and Abigail knew they had found not only each other, but also the courage to believe in second chances and new beginnings.